The smell hit me before anything else. Not smoke, not blood, not the cold pine sap of the mountains. It was something sweeter, and that was the part that made my legs go soft. Sweet, like fruit that had been left too long in a warm room. Sweet, in a place where nothing should have smelled like anything at all, except snow and horse and old wool. I was 23 years old, standing at the edge of a village called Mednia in the foothills of the Carpathians. And I remember thinking, very clearly, that whatever was making that smell was not finished yet. I am going to tell you everything. I have not told it in full to anyone, not in all these years, and I am old now, and tired, and if I do not put this down somewhere it will go into the ground with me. So sit close. Pour yourself something warm. This story takes a while, and you should not hear it in pieces. It was the winter of 1739. I was a soldier in a small unit sent up into the mountains, into a stretch of forest the maps barely bothered to mark. The empire we served had pushed its borders into those hills only a few years before, and the men in fine coats back in the capital still thought of the place as theirs. The people who actually lived there knew better. The forest was not anyone's. The forest belonged to itself. We were sent because of letters. That is the funny part, when I look back. The whole reason I was up there, freezing my hands inside 2 pairs of gloves, and watching my breath turn to ice on my collar, was because someone in a warm office had written a letter. Several letters, actually. They came down from villages spread across the high valleys, and they all said the same thing in different handwriting. The dead were not staying dead. The dead were walking. The dead were coming back to the houses they used to live in, and they were doing things to the people inside. The officers laughed at first. I want you to know that. They sat in their warm rooms, and they laughed and called it peasant nonsense. The kind of story old women told to keep children indoors after dark. But the letters kept coming. And then a priest came down from the mountains himself, on foot, in the middle of winter, and stood in front of those officers, with frostbite on 3 of his fingers, and told them that his village was emptying. Not from sickness, not from anything sensible. People were dying in their beds at night, he said, and then they were getting up, so they sent us. 12 men, a surgeon, a clerk to write it all down, a priest of our own in case we needed one, and me, the youngest of the lot, because I could read and write a little, and because my mother had been born in those mountains. And I knew enough of the language to ask for bread, and ask for directions, and, as it turned out, ask the kinds of questions no one wanted to answer. The ride-up was beautiful. I have to tell you that, because if I only tell you about the horror, you will not understand the shape of what happened. The forest in winter was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen in my life. The pines were so tall they made cathedrals out of nothing. The snow came down in pieces so big and slow you could catch them on your tongue. The horse's breath came out in clouds that hung in the air behind us like ghosts of the horses, only smaller. At night, when we made camp, the stars were so thick they did not look like stars anymore. They looked like a spill of sugar across a black cloth. I remember laughing once, out loud alone, just because it was so beautiful, and one of the older men turned his head and looked at me, and did not laugh back. He had been up in those mountains before. He knew something I did not yet know. The beauty was real, but it was a kind of beauty that was not on your side. The first village we reached was called Krov. It was small, maybe 40 houses, set on a slope that caught the morning sun. We were greeted by a man called Only the Elder, who came out of the largest house and stood in the snow without a coat and watched us ride in. He was an old man. His face was the color of bark. He had eyes the color of a frozen pond. He did not smile. He did not frown. He just watched us, and when we got down off our horses he said, in the kind of slow, careful voice a man uses with a sick child, "You are too late, but come inside." Now, here is the thing about people in those villages. I had been told they would be ignorant. I had been told they would be hysterical, screaming about devils and crossing themselves in fits. They were not. They were calm. They were too calm. They were calm in the way a person is calm after they have been crying for 3 days and have no tears left. They had stopped being afraid of what was happening to them. They had moved past it. They were just waiting for it to take them too. That was the first wrong thing. Not a scream. Not a sign of struggle. Just a village full of people who had given up. The elder fed us. Hot stewed dark bread. Something to drink that tasted like wet smoke. While we ate, he told us, in that same slow voice, what had been happening. It had started in October. A man named, well, I will not give his name, because he was a real person, and he had a wife and a daughter, and they are not here to ask permission. A man had died in October of nothing in particular. He had been healthy in the morning and dead by supper, and they had buried him as people do, with the prayers and the candles and the cold hard work of digging into ground that was already starting to freeze. A week after he was buried, his wife had woken up in the middle of the night because she heard footsteps in her kitchen. She had thought it was her daughter. She had called out. No one had answered. The footsteps had stopped at the door of her bedroom, and then they had gone away. In the morning, she had found mud on the floor of the kitchen, and mud on the floor of the hallway, and mud at the door of her bedroom, and the mud had the shape of a man's bare foot. I am telling you this exactly the way the elder told it to me. I am not making it bigger. He said it the way you might say, the chimney needs cleaning. Flat. Tired. As if he had said it many times to many people already, and the saying of it had worn smooth like a stone in a river. 3 nights later, the wife was dead. She had no wound on her. The skin under her jaw was a little dark, the elder said, but that could have been from anything. Her daughter had found her in the morning. The girl was 11. She had run to a neighbor's house. The neighbor had gone to look and had found, on the floor next to the bed, a single bare footprint in dried mud. By the time we arrived in Krov, 11 people had died this way. 11. In a village of less than 200. And every one of them had been someone close, by blood or by friendship, to the man who had died first. Our surgeon was a sharp man. He was not the kind to believe in stories. He asked questions the way a man pokes at a fire with a stick, looking for what was underneath. He asked about the water. He asked about the food. He asked if anyone had been sick before they died, if there had been coughing, if there had been fever. The elder answered everything patiently. No. They had simply gone to bed and not woken up. Some had a little darkness on the throat. Some did not. None of them had been ill. The surgeon then asked the question that I think changed everything for me. He asked, very politely, if we could see the body of the man who had died first. The elder did not answer right away. He looked at his hands. He looked at the fire. And then he said, you can see him, but he is not where we put him. I want you to feel that sentence the way I felt it. We were inside, warm, full of stew. Outside the wind was moving through the pines and making a sound like someone drawing a long, slow breath. And this old man, this calm old man with the eyes like a frozen pond, had just told us in the gentlest possible voice that the body of a man buried in October had moved. The clerk dropped his pen. I remember that. I remember the small sound it made on the wooden floor. We went out to the graveyard the next morning. It was a small place behind the church, with wooden markers, most of them leaning. The snow was deep. The elder walked ahead of us and stopped at a grave near the back. The wooden marker had fallen over. The snow on top of the grave was not flat the way the other graves were flat. It was disturbed. It had been disturbed, the elder said, 3 different times. They had filled it back in twice. They had stopped filling it in after that. Our surgeon gave the order to dig. 2 of our men did it. They were not happy about it. The ground was hard, and they had to break through a top layer of ice. It took most of the morning. The priest, who had come with us, stood off to one side and prayed under his breath the whole time. And every so often he would stop praying and just stare at the hole in the ground, as if he were waiting for something to climb out of it. When they reached the coffin, they had to use a rope to lift it. They set it on the snow. The lid was loose. It had not been nailed down properly the second time, the elder said quietly. They had not had the heart to do it again. The surgeon stepped forward and lifted the lid. I will tell you what I saw, and I will tell you exactly. I am not going to make it bigger or smaller than it was. The man in the coffin had been dead for almost 3 months. He should have looked like something out of a nightmare. He should have been bone and shrunken skin, and the hollow places where eyes used to be. He was not. He looked like a man who had eaten a heavy meal and laid down to sleep. His skin was pink. Not pale. Not gray. Pink, the color of a living man in cold weather. His cheeks were full. His lips were dark, almost purple, but they were soft-looking. His hands were folded on his chest, and the fingernails on his hands were long. Longer than they should have been, the surgeon said quietly, longer than a dead man's nails grow. And under his nose, in a thin dark line that ran down toward his chin, was blood. Fresh blood. Not dried, not old. Wet enough to catch the light. That was the moment I understood what we were actually dealing with. I had grown up in a city. I had been taught by men who wore wigs and quoted books in Latin. I had been told, all my life, that the world had rules. That sickness was sickness. That death was death. That a man, once put in the ground, stayed in the ground. And in that moment, kneeling in the snow next to an open coffin, with my breath coming out in short, hard puffs, I understood that the men who had taught me had not been wrong, exactly. They had simply never been here. They had never been to this place, where the rules they believed in did not apply. And I understood, with a cold, flat certainty that I have never been able to fully shake off, that I was very far from home. The surgeon was the calmest of all of us. He took notes. He measured. He looked under the man's tongue. He pressed his fingers against the chest and frowned. He turned to the elder and asked, in a quiet voice, "What would you have us do?" The elder said, "You know what we do." The surgeon nodded. He looked at the priest. The priest looked at the ground. And then the surgeon gave the order. And one of our men brought a wooden stake from a pile of cut firewood. And the surgeon raised a small hammer. And I want you to understand that I turned my head. I did. I am not proud of that. But I turned my head, because I was 23 and I could not watch. I heard it, though. I heard the sound it made. I heard the sound that came out of the coffin after. A long, low sound, like the wind in a chimney. And one of our men crossed himself so hard he punched himself in the chest. The elder did not flinch. He had heard it before. We burned the body that afternoon. We had to wait for the fire to get hot enough. It took longer than it should have. The smoke went straight up in a column. And I will tell you something strange. The smoke did not smell like burning wood. It did not smell like meat. It smelled, faintly sweet, like fruit left out too long in a warm room. I would smell that smell again 3 days later, in a different village, under a different sky. And that time I would know what it meant before anyone had to tell me. We moved on the next morning. We rode higher into the mountains, where the trees grew so close together that the daylight came down in coins. We went to the village the elder had pointed us toward, a place called Mednia, the place I started by telling you about. We arrived in the late afternoon. The smell hit me at the edge of the trees, before we even saw the houses. Sweet, faint, wrong. I want to stop here for a moment, you and me, because we are getting into the part of the story that I have not told to anyone. And before I tell you the rest, I want to ask you something. If a story like this means anything to you, if you have ever felt that there are places in the world that the maps do not quite cover, stay close to me. Subscribe so I do not lose you, because I have other stories like this one, and I would like to tell them to someone who actually listens. Drop a word in the comments and tell me what you think was really happening in those mountains. I have my own answer. I am not sure it is the right one. But for now, let me keep going, because the worst is still ahead, and I need to get through it while I have the nerve. In Mednia there was no elder waiting for us. There was no one waiting for us at all. The doors of the houses were closed. The chimneys were cold. We rode down the main path between the houses, and our horses began to act strange, pulling at their bits, turning their heads back the way we had come. My horse was a steady animal. He had been through cannon fire. In Mednia, he tried to turn around 3 times in the space of a minute, and the 3rd time I had to lean down and speak into his ear to keep him moving. We dismounted. The surgeon called out. No one answered. The priest called out, using the proper greeting in the local tongue. No one answered. We went to the first house and knocked, and the door swung open on its own because it had not been closed properly. We went inside. There was a table set for a meal. 3 bowls, 3 spoons. Bread on a board, hard now, gone gray at the edges. A pot on the cold hearth with something inside that had frozen and split the pot. 3 chairs pushed back from the table, as if the people sitting in them had stood up all at once and walked out. There were no people. We went to the second house. The same. A meal half prepared, a chair pushed back. No people. We went to the 3rd house, and the 4th, and the 5th. In the 6th house we found a cradle. And there was a small shape in the cradle wrapped in a blanket. And the surgeon went over and looked into it, and then turned away very fast, and would not let any of us look. I want you to know that I have thought about cradle every day of my life since. I do not know what the surgeon saw. He never spoke of it. He drank himself to sleep that night, and the next night, and the night after. And when he finally talked about Mednia, years later, in a letter to a colleague that I would read after his death, he did not mention the cradle. Some things, I think, a person decides not to remember out loud. I respect that. I respect him. We searched the whole village, every house, 28 houses. No people, not one. The animals were gone too, mostly, though we found a goat tied behind one house, alive but starving, and we cut it loose and gave it the last of our oats. The goat would not look at us. It kept its eyes on the trees. The trees. The trees were the thing. Behind every house in Mednia, the forest came right up to the back wall. The pines so close you could touch them from the kitchen windows. And in the snow at the edge of the trees, all around the village, there were footprints, bare footprints, going in, not coming out, going in. We made our camp in the middle of the village that night, because none of us could stand the idea of sleeping inside one of those houses. We built a fire bigger than we needed. We posted 4 watchmen instead of 2. We sat close together, closer than soldiers usually sit, and we did not joke, and we did not eat much. And when the priest tried to lead us in a prayer, his voice cracked twice, and he had to start over. I had the second watch. It was after midnight, when the man I was relieving handed me the musket and said, very quietly, "Do not look at the trees." I asked him what he meant. He said, "Just do not look at the trees." And he went and lay down by the fire, and pulled his blanket all the way up over his head. I stood there with the musket, and I did not look at the trees. For an hour I did not look at the trees. I looked at the fire. I looked at my boots. I looked at the houses with their cold black windows. And then, the way you cannot help it, when someone tells you not to do something, I looked. There was a man standing at the edge of the forest. He was not moving. He was just standing there, between 2 pines, with his arms at his sides. I could see him, because the moon was full, and the snow was bright. He was not wearing a coat. He was not wearing anything at all that I could make out, except maybe a long shirt that hung loose around his legs. His head was tilted slightly to one side, the way a dog tilts its head when it is listening. He was looking at me. I did not raise the musket. I did not call out. I do not know why. I think part of me knew that if I made a sound, more of them would come. I just stood there, and he stood there, and for what felt like a very long time we looked at each other across the snow. Then he took one step forward, out from between the trees, into the open. His feet were bare. He left no footprints. I want to be very clear about that. The snow was deep. My own boots had pressed deep holes in it when I walked my watch. He took a step, and the snow under his foot did not move. Not a grain. I made a sound then. A small one, not even a word. And the men by the fire heard it, because soldiers sleep with one ear open, and one of them sat up and looked where I was looking. And he made a sound too, and then everyone was up. The man at the edge of the village was gone. There was no movement of him going. He had simply stopped being there. The 2 pines he had been standing between were empty. The surgeon came over to me. He was a steady man, but his hands were shaking. He asked me how many. I said 1. He asked me if I was sure. I said yes. I should have left then. Every part of me knew it. But I stayed. We all stayed, because that was the job. And because by morning we had half convinced ourselves it had been a trick of the light, or a deer, or a frightened survivor, too scared to come to the fire. We told ourselves these things the way men in danger always tell themselves things, with our voices a little too loud, with our laughs a little too quick. By daylight, with the sun coming down through the pines in those bright coins, the village looked almost ordinary. Empty, but ordinary. The kind of empty that could be explained. We started searching the forest at the back of the village, following the bare footprints in. The surgeon led. The priest came behind him with his book held tight against his chest. I was somewhere in the middle. The forest was quiet. Not the regular quiet of winter woods, which is full of small sounds if you listen, the creak of branches and the soft fall of snow from high places. This was a different quiet, the kind of quiet that listens back. We walked for almost an hour. The footprints did not stop. They went in deeper and deeper, sometimes one set, sometimes many, sometimes crossing over each other, as if a crowd had passed through. And then, in a small clearing, where the pines opened up around a flat patch of ground, we found them. I am going to tell you what we found, and then I am going to stop, because there is not much more to say after. There were people in the clearing. Maybe 30 of them. They were lying on the snow, in a rough circle, with their feet pointing toward the center. They were not moving. They were not breathing. Their eyes were open. Their skin was the same pink color I had seen in the open coffin and Krov. Their lips were the same dark purple. Some of them had blood under their noses, fresh blood, wet blood, in a place where the temperature had been below freezing for weeks. They were dressed in nightclothes. Some of them in nothing at all. I recognized, by the cradle blanket lying near one of them, the small empty shape we had found in the 6th house. In the middle of the circle there was nothing. Just a patch of bare ground where the snow had melted. The ground in the middle was wet. The ground in the middle was warm enough to steam in the cold air. There was no fire. There had been no fire. The ground was warm anyway. The priest fell to his knees. He did not pray. He just knelt there with his book open and his mouth open, and no sound came out. The surgeon walked around the circle slowly. He counted. 29. He took notes the way he always took notes, but his pen kept slipping. And the writing in his book that day, which I would see later, was barely readable. He bent down next to one of them, and pressed his fingers against the throat, and I saw his face change. He stood up very fast. He said, "We are leaving. We are leaving now." We did what he said. We turned and we walked out of that clearing, and none of us looked back, and we did not stop walking until we were back inside the empty village. We packed our things. We mounted our horses. We rode out of Mednia before the sun had moved another finger's width across the sky. We did not burn the bodies in the clearing. We did not stake them. We did not bury them. We left them where they were, in their circle, around their warm patch of bare ground. And to this day, I do not know what the surgeon felt when he touched that man's throat. But I know what I think. I think the man's throat was warm. I think there was a pulse under his fingers, faint, slow, but there. I think the people in the clearing were not dead the way we understand dead, and I think they were not alive the way we understand alive. I think they were waiting. I have wondered, all my life, what they were waiting for. We rode back down out of those mountains for 4 days. We did not speak much. The priest prayed under his breath constantly. The surgeon wrote and wrote and wrote in his book. I stopped looking at the trees. I told myself I was tired. I told myself I needed to keep my eyes on the road. I told myself many things. The truth is I was afraid that if I looked, I would see someone standing between 2 pines, watching me go, with his head tilted slightly to one side. When we made our report, back in the warm rooms of men in wigs, no one believed us. They thanked the surgeon. They filed the clerk's notes. They paid us. They sent us on to other duties. The official record of the expedition. The one that was put away in a wooden cabinet and forgotten about, said that the villages had been emptied by sickness, and that the strange beliefs of the local people were a matter for the church to address. The word that the local people used for what was happening, the word that the elder in Crove had said to us very quietly on the 2nd day, was not written down. The officials did not want that word in their files. The word was an old word, a peasant word, a word that the men in the capital found embarrassing. I will not write the word here either. Not because I am afraid of it. Because I do not think the word is right. The word makes you picture a thing from a story, a thing with fangs and a cape, a thing you can fight with a wooden stake and a clove of garlic. What we found in those mountains was not that. What we found was older than that. The word that people use today came later, and it is smaller than the thing it tries to describe. What we found was a place where the line between living and dead had gone soft. That is the closest I can come. A place where the line had worn through. The way a path through the woods wears through over many years of feet. And once it wore through, things could step across it in both directions, and the people who lived nearby were the ones who paid for it. I went back to my city. I went back to my life. I married. I had children. I had grandchildren. I am old now, sitting by my own fire, and the world I live in is a sensible world, with electric lights and trains and newspapers. And most days I can almost believe that the things I have told you did not happen the way I remember them. Most days. Not all of them. There is one more thing I should tell you, and then I will let you go. About 10 years after we came down out of those mountains, I had a letter from the surgeon. He had grown old too, faster than he should have. He wrote to me from a small house in the country, where he had gone to live alone. The letter was short. He said he had been thinking about Mednia. He said he had been thinking about the clearing. He said he had been thinking about the warm ground in the middle of the circle, and the way the bodies had been arranged, and he believed, now, that he understood what he had seen. He did not write down what he understood. He wrote only one sentence at the end of the letter, and then he signed his name, and 3 weeks later I heard that he had died in his sleep, at his table, with his pen still in his hand. The sentence he wrote was this: they were not the dead coming back. They were something else, wearing the dead. I read that sentence by candlelight, in my own kitchen, and I felt the smell come back, sweet, faint, like fruit left out too long in a warm room. There was no fruit in my kitchen. There was no warm room. There was just me, and the candle, and the letter, and the wind outside moving through trees that were not pines but were trees all the same, and for one moment, just one, I was 23 years old again, standing at the edge of a village in the snow, with my horse trying to turn around under me, and a smell in the air that should not have been there. I have lived a long life since. I have been a good man, I hope, or at least not a bad one. I have loved people, and lost some of them, and held the hands of a few as they went where I could not follow. I have learned that the world is large, and that most of it is gentle, and that the part that is not gentle is small. But it is there, and it is real, and it does not care whether you believe in it. If you ever go up into those mountains, and you will not, but if you ever do, and you smell something sweet at the edge of the trees, do not go any closer. Turn your horse around. Ride out the way you came. Do not look at the trees. And whatever you do, do not stand at the edge of a forest in the moonlight and look back to see if anyone is watching you go, because someone is. Someone always is.